right, and we are live. Hello, ladies, and welcome to Rancho Live show. Today is June 24th, and I have Amanda and Kim joining me from different parts of the world. Hello and welcome. All right. Kim, you're at Open Source Summit, as far as I know, right? How's it
Yes.
going?
Yeah, I'm at Open Source Summit in Denver, and there's been some good talks. I listened to a really interesting one on edge computing yesterday, how the Air Force and Chick-fil-A both are using edge computing. And Chick-fil-A, guess whose edge solution they're using, Orland?
I don't know.
They're
Maybe
using
the guys
Pancreas.
behind you, right? Yeah.
They're using Rancher. It was really interesting to have them share the challenges that they have with their edge computing environments. What was interesting is that the other person from the Air Force, he did all of his totally with open source. So it was, I thought that was interesting, that if you have something as important as an edge computing environment for aircraft, and he was able to do it with all open source. It was a great talk.
Amanda, how you doing?
Doing good? Hi, I'm doing well this morning. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for accepting my offer to join and do that great talk of yours that you did at KubeCon. So, my name is Orlin. I'm CNCF ambassador. I'm also a technology advocate at SUSE. And I have Kim. We used to share a work together back in the CNCF days when she was part of the team. And Amanda, we used to share work at VMware with her. So, two great ladies doing great talks. And right now, okay. So first of all, let's do a round of introductions. So let's go. Amanda, what are you doing these days after the VMware Live?
Sure. These days, I'm working in open source data infrastructure over at NetApp InstaCluster. And just having a fun time, just continuing to work in open source. I've known Kim now for over a decade, from the beginning of the Kubernetes days, and just excited to be here to give back some learnings to people. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And you, Kim?
Yeah,
you changed roles also recently. You changed roles not long a time ago, right?
I did, yeah. I worked in open source for a long time. I guess if it wasn't for Amanda, none of you would know me, because Amanda was my first boss in open source, moving over from high performance computing. So we can thank Amanda for anybody who gets to know me in this community. But yeah, as you mentioned, I worked for CNCF and the Linux Foundation and a couple other projects for a long time. And now I'm with a company called Sidero Labs. We have an open source project and a product that works in Kubernetes environments. So we have an open source and product, and Amanda has that, and that's kind of how we came together to put together this talk. Is, how do you balance that when you have all that at a company? So head of marketing over at Sidero, and we're having a great time. So I'm excited to have this podcast with you.
Nice. All right. So why I invited you was because you did a great talk of balancing out between the open source and the corporate requirements. What was the name of navigating the waters, balancing open source activities in corporate environments? I'm going to share that. So that's kind of long, but like a name, and the topic is enormous as well. But I know the background. I've watched the talk, but I really want to reiterate once again. And why did you do that talk on KubeCon? Why it's important to people to be educated around this? I don't want to do another talk again, which would be great. But if we can have some kind of parallel of talk and discussion around that, would be great. So why you needed to do that? What kind of issues you saw in your experience, so we can work on this one. And who's going to go first?
Amanda.
Amanda, Kim. All right.
Well, I can start, and then Amanda will jump in. As I mentioned, Amanda and I, we've worked together in a couple different organizations, and when we worked for organizations, they had an open source project. And then in Amanda can talk about some of the organizations that she's worked in. I mean, I went from that where we were really focused just on driving open source. And then I worked for the foundations. And then I went to companies that had an open source project. Some were part of CNCF and some were not, as well as products. And that's, kind of coming to this other side. It gets to be challenging when you're trying to figure out how you can stay true to the tenets of open source whilst also trying to meet some of the organizational goals. So Amanda and I started talking about this topic and just some of the things we had to balance and some of the tactics and techniques that we would use. And we kind of thought it'd be if we wanted to share the information. We thought it'd be good information to share.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good topic. I think every time I've started a new job within the last decade, this comes up, right? And so it's a balancing act of, I want to work in open source. I want to be authentic. I like working in open source and what that brings, but I also like my paycheck. And so I think many of us these days, find ourselves, sitting between the two, and we really need to figure out, how do we best go about this so we can do the work that we love, and continue to get paid for it.
Good. And so do you see kind of problem in the perception of people working for open source, but also, as you said, they should generate some revenue out of their work? So is there a problem in that setup? Like, a lot of companies these days are doing some changes in their licensing, for example, so they can survive. So obviously there's something not right there. What's your thoughts on this one? And can you go over a little bit of what you covered on the talk around that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll start it again, Amanda. Yeah, there have been licensing changes, and coming from a foundation which theoretically can protect licensing. The licensing changes clearly show that even being part of foundation, companies sometimes need to make changes. And we didn't cover this I guess we did cover this a little bit in the talk, that, open source is about everybody coming together and contributing. And it's about shared knowledge and diversity. And it's about giving back. And when companies or organizations just take open source and they don't contribute back at all. And there's a lot of ways you can contribute. I've talked about this. We didn't cover this in this talk, but there's a lot of ways you can contribute back to an open source project that benefits a project. But when companies just take, then it gets to I think that's why we see some of these licensing changes, because you can't survive if you're spending all your engineering resources and putting them into an open source project, and then have your product competing against somebody else's exact same product. And that's, which is kind of a different topic, but that's kind of what we started coming together and talking about when with Amanda in our talk is how do we take that open source project and tie it closer together with the product so that the teams work together better, and that the community and the users understand the difference between the open source project and the product, and people can make a decision on what's best for them. And that's kind of what brought us together, is how can we bring that closer together so that our organizations can be healthier, contributing and having open source and using open source, as well as trying to sell a product that's based on that open source. And
yeah,
Amanda,
really,
I was going to say, you had some ideas. Oops, go ahead.
It's just the elephant in the room. How do you work together? How do you put together teams so that open source people, their goals are still tied to open source, and your product teams, they are still, tied to, building a great product that gets sold. And just just, really what that looks like, because it's tough.
Yeah. And so you think this kind of working together, that you're placing the two efforts of work, like the open source community work, next to the product. So you're trying to connect the both sides, right? That's what I think that's one of the points that you made in your talk about these two things going together in the one direction, so they can collaborate and they can feed from each other, right? Can you share some around that? I'm trying to guide you through your talk, which is maybe bad idea in general.
No, I think that's okay. I think, yeah, I mean, Amanda covered the elephant in the room, and our talk did not get into product. Like the decisions. I want to make this point before Amanda gets into how she brings the team together on basically how the teams are going to work together. But our talk didn't cover product, and we won't cover that here today either. That if you have an open source project and your product isn't that different, that's a different issue than that you have. What we're really focused on is how you bring together the open source team and the product team, like the marketing and the community side of it, to help promote both sides. And Amanda has a really great 1, 2, 3 framework that she's used that that she educated me on as we were preparing for the talk.
Yeah, sure. So when I go in, I've specifically been working in open source for over a decade. So a lot of my experience comes from the open source side. And so when I go into a new team or a new job, I really like to go in really eyes wide open, right? To create, a team charter, metrics, and a communication path with leadership. The first thing that I always do is listen and learn. So, the first 30 days, it's just so important to listen and create that Google Doc on the side with all of your ideas. But go back 30 days later and reflect on your doc to see if those are really good ideas still. And during that first 30 days, really, talking to as many people as you can. I like to go through and talk to all of the stakeholders, from anybody in the organization all the way up the leadership chain, people working, adjacent, on my teams. And I ask them 4 specific questions to gain a better understanding of what it is that the team needs to do. So I ask everybody, do you have experience working with open source or developer engagement teams? This tells me if people, are coming in with an idea about what the team should be doing or not. The second thing I asked you is, in your view, how are things working today? This gives you a good basis of what's working and definitely what's not working. People, in my experience, tend to share what's not working in this comment, which is good to know, where you have challenges at. And the third thing I ask is, what does success look like? This is important when you go talk up your management chain, to make sure that you understand what people are looking for from your team so that you deliver, right? You want to keep delivering and what you need to and why you were hired. And then the fourth question I asked is, what are the expectations of the program? And this is where a lot of new ideas and creativity usually come about. To give people an idea of how many people I talked to, the last time I did this at NetApp about a year or so ago, I talked to over 30 people. And so this is a great way to get your name out there, get introduced to people, and also provide you a framework of going about creating that team charter of yours.
Hey, Amanda, so I have a question. So who do you talk to? You talk to product and marketing? I mean, are there certain, did you go as far as engineering when you have these conversations?
Yes, the more people that you can talk to, the better. Because when you're doing this, you're also gaining credibility for yourself. That's especially important if you're starting out at a new job. So I talk to product managers, engineer, developing managers, demand gen, salespeople, product management, my leadership chain. I talk to everybody, really. And I especially talk to people who are on my team, like, why are they there?
Well, you're good at talking to everybody, but yeah, I was just kind of curious because I didn't spend time talking to engineering when I joined. So maybe I should have. Or maybe I will go back and do that. So
it's never too late, Kim. Never too
it's
late.
Never too late. Yeah. But I think what happens, so you have so much data and everybody, I think everybody has a different need. How do you go about balancing that? That's because I end up, when I gather all that kind of different data, I end up putting it in kind of different lists of what we can maybe do. But how have you organized all your data that you've just gathered?
Sure. What I do is I create a team charter.
Ah.
And what this does is just orientate myself and my team. It takes into account all the feedback that I receive from stakeholders. But what it really does is provide a framework to say no. And so that's really important because I feel like when you're in open source teams, you get asked for a lot. And sometimes you get asked for things and you feel like you should do them because somebody's asking you, because you don't necessarily have that framework to say no. And if you just say yes to everything, you burn out pretty quick in open source. Or you get dragged too many ways and you end up not liking your job at all. And so I start with that team charter. So it just goes through, why the team exists, the strategic objectives. I stick to 3. I think anything more than 3, you're not really going to get done, and you're going to fail. I believe in failing fast, but I also believe in setting up your team for success. So I just stick to 3. What does success look like and how you're going to go about it, and then revisit it every year. So
yes. So our organization, our company is pretty small, so we don't have it's a small company and a small team, and so a lot of people were just doing basically, anybody else's jobs. Yeah, you just kind of come in. So what I have done is when I take that information, I'll go the next step and kind of say, okay, this is a feeder into marketing, for example, and here's an output from marketing. Because kind of what I found is people will work within their silos, but they don't, sometimes the team members don't really, they have no, like if they're long time, if they were never marketers, a lot of times they're like, they have no idea what we do. They think maybe we just do a website, but they have no idea that if you go ahead and you make a product decision or a licensing change decision or any sort of decision that is an input into marketing. So I found when I create that charter, I end up adding a little bit of, okay, this is who's inputting this information and here's who needs to get this information, so that it kind of helps us all work together better and sharing what we all need to know to do our jobs best. Kind of breaking down silos.
Maybe I need to go revisit ours and make sure I have something like that in there as well.
Well, it helps. I don't know why I'm surprised, because I don't really know what engineering does, but I get comments like, I don't even know what marketing does. And I'm like, oh, well, here, let me help you understand why I need to know this, right? Like why I need to know when you're going to release something. And if it's a big release, like why I need to know not the day before, but a couple of weeks before, for example. So, yeah.
That's a very interesting question. How you think people should solve that issue? I know how I've been solving that for a while, but what's your take on this one? Like the communication between engineering and the marketing, which marketing, not necessarily in the bad way of marketing, but like telling out the message of, for example, new release, new features kind of marketing, not the sales marketing thing. What's your take on this one?
Well, so Yeah, it depends. No, it depends a little bit on the personality of the person. And so one of the ways that I have done that in the past is a release happens. Like this will be like when I first joined, like a release happens, and I figure out what's in that release, and I just kind of go back and in whatever our communication platform is, whether it's a meeting or on Slack, and wow, this is a really big deal. Like this feature is a really big deal to the market because it enables somebody to do this. And it, so I'm going to write, here's what I'm going to produce, a blog or a video or whatever it is. So I end up most of the engineers, just kind of explain to them that, hey, this is really important and this is why it's important and this is what I'm going to do. And next time, if I know a couple weeks ahead of time, I can have this ready to go when you release. And then they're like, oh yeah, we never thought about it that way. So a lot of times it's that they just didn't think about it. So helping them understand how valuable their work is to the users is one of the ways that I've approached that to help them collaborate with marketing better.
Yeah, you just have to go about that. I mean, everybody wants, more users, right? Everybody wants to build something cool and exciting that people want to use, right? And so I think you really nailed it on the head when you're just saying, if you describe everything into increasing user adoption, then people see themselves in that, because that is a common goal between teams. And so that it's easier to do. And I would say on the side of, running an open source engineering team, knowing about a product or project launch is really important. Or if you're signed up to deliver something on that launch plan, it's really good to know beforehand as well. So I think it works, both ways, just that communication, the openness. And again, that's why I love open source, right? You just put up your launch doc, everybody can see it, and everybody can, get involved.
Absolutely. And I was leaning towards also to mention a role that it's very often not taking seriously, like the community management kind of role, where people are taking care of that communication between the engineering team and the rest of the folks who are using the project. And because I've seen for a lot of products and projects in particular, huge engineering effort, and they're doing a great job, but that communication, that message is not conveyed out to the community, or it's like in some release notes somewhere, and it's not, it's a way to communicate, right? But it's not for everybody, right? It's some people love digging into GitHub and release notes and changes and everything. Others just like to see a tweet out or LinkedIn, I don't know, post about this stuff. So do you think that role of community overseer or caretaker, I hate the word manager, community manager, it just doesn't sound right, but it's in my opinion, it's a thing. Yeah. Amanda, you're laughing because I was doing that for a while already.
I'm laughing because that's the role I hired you into from engineering.
I know.
I love that. If you have a better title, let me know.
No. We were thinking about community. What is that? The caretaker. It sounds a little bit more. How to say? Close to the person, not like manager is too fancy, I think.
Maybe anyway. Advocacy, instead of calling it marketing. Yeah.
That's my official role. It's just anyway. So yeah, we kind of go in that direction. So
but so in organizations I've been in, and actually probably nearly every one of them. I mean, Orlin, you were engineering. You probably know that when you were in engineering, before you were really more user facing. I've gotten a comment back from probably every organization I've been in. It's like, hey, the release notes are in GitHub, just go get it. And to me, that's so painful for me to read, right? Like for me to kind of dig through that and read that is hard for somebody that doesn't have an engineering background. So how I helped educate, what I needed is I would go and I would painfully dig through that information and then write up why somebody cares. Because I think that's where you're kind of going with the LinkedIn post is the release notes are important and everybody and the people who need to read them are going to read them. But sometimes people just need to know why they care. Like, do I need to read these? And that's what I would try to do in my advocacy and marketing roles is take what they did and this affects you. This is why you care about it. And it's the piece that I end up providing, to help kind of round out our communications and the hard work that engineering is doing.
Amanda, your take on this one? I'm super looking forward to that.
So, honestly, I like to make it easy, right? So in release notes, if we're going to release something, I like to just put in like why you should care or use cases enabled or, here's the outcome that you can get to. And then it just makes it a little bit easier for everybody because there's not so much back and forth. So at least on the engineering side, you can write up some simplistic things that then, as somebody in marketing, could then use to gain greater awareness of, but at least you give like the hint of where things are going. And that's just to reduce back and forths, really.
Cool. Okay. We have some notes that we did prior, like having that conversation going. So you touched a little bit on communications and not working in silos. Do you have some more on this one, like how to break that barrier? What kind of activities, or I don't know, what kind of actions you can take to bring the teams closer, like the open source people with the product people? Do you believe there's a need to do that? Like, so we said that you didn't touch that on your talk about product, but still.
Yeah, sure. Right now, in the past several jobs that I've had, we have worldwide teams. Everybody's on a different time zone. And yes, asynchronous communication works and you can be clear. And if you have people, working on a team in another country, you could use that as like an outsourcing type, environment for the work. But honestly, my experience tells me that people just need to figure out a way to get on the phone once a month and make sure to talk. So it just time and time again, a 25-minute conversation is what's needed and what keeps the stickiness together. We can do async work all day long, but personally for me, I start to just feel out of touch with the world and I'm just this digital human being versus, my authentic self in open source. And I miss the connection a little bit, but I also just find, especially when you're dealing with teams from different countries all over the world, that sometimes just talking is the best way. So that's what we do. We set up a forced sync. It's, once a month, 25 minutes. And sometimes we rotate, who gets the short end of the stick for the timing of it, because we have teams everywhere. But everybody does jump on, and sometimes it's a really quick call, and sometimes it does get a little bit longer. But then you also get the connections back with the people that you work with. It's just not a name on a document somewhere saying that they edited something.
How that reflects on the dynamics of the work? For example, highly distributed teams are having different dynamics, and do that play a role in the balancing this kind of values of open source towards and in corporate stuff? I'm throwing that question out of the blue. Sorry about that.
For sure, 100%. everybody works a little bit differently. And my team does get together once a month, or not once a month, my team, not in person. We do get together every year in person and have some good laughs about, miscommunications or things that happened, async, or, we like to do a toast to fails once a year. And sometimes the fail is that just we totally misunderstood each other and went like this before we came back together again. So yeah, I mean, it does help. We do live in a highly distributed world right now, and it does help. That's what we do.
Yeah, I agree. Like when you can get people together and you get to meet them, you just understand their communication style. And just like on social media, it's easy to be mean to somebody if you have no idea who they are, and you can just put some flippant comment out there. But in our team, and I you can maybe, some people can maybe tend to do that on their corporate Slack channels, for example, if they don't. But once you get together, if you don't really know the person, but once you get together and you know the person and you understand their communication style, that's what has been really important to me is that in person, and that when they say this or they act like that, that's not them being not nice. It's their communication style. And for me, it's really helpful to understand how they communicate, how they want to hear information, and how they share information. Because then, in my role in marketing, I mean, everything of course, marketing's the most important. No, marketing's not the most important, but a lot of things come down to what I have to do and how I'm going to communicate and where am I going to put the information. And so I need to get that. So I need to understand what their preferred communication style is. And that helps break down that silo and kind of brings us together as a global remote workforce. Because my company currently is, actually every company I've been at recently is 100% remote. And we got to figure out how people want to communicate out and how they like to receive information helps with that remote relationship, I have found.
Okay, another one. You both are working right now in companies that are active in open source.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working as well, right? Have you worked in organizations that are not having that, and what's the difference? Like, how that differs big time? I suppose it's like a big time differentiator.
Yeah, yeah. I think when companies, so I have seen this. When I've worked for the foundation, I've seen organizations that maybe had a lot of velocity, but sometimes they tend to lose their way in open source, and or they just they're not innovating, or they're really just not I guess maybe just tired, and I don't know I'm not sure exactly what they did to kind of revitalize themselves. I think kind of going through some of the planning process can tend to, like, if you kind of feel like you're just going through the motions and doing the same thing every day, maybe kind of restarting the planning process. I don't know, Amanda, what kind of ideas do you have?
I mean, I've worked at a couple hardware companies, right? So
Wow.
software in general, right? And then open source on top of it. I think it just comes down to education. That's why I always have a team charter, because sometimes it does get tiring educating people. So if you just have a doc that you can share out before having a conversation, I think it works really well. But I think it really just comes down to a lot of education about what you do and what you don't do, and what value you bring. Why is it important that we have these relationships, and what does that do, and the ability to articulate that value is so important. So that, that's what I see, and I see that, teams who are consistently innovating and having fun, and everybody likes to show up to work and do cool stuff, they do have an environment where that education piece is a little bit simpler, because you don't have to spend your days explaining why you have a job necessarily. You can just do cool work, and it ties into that value prop.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're brainstorming, and when you shared the example of, you talk about your successes and you talk about your fails, kind of having that brainstorming can really get people innovating and thinking of, like, how do we do things different?
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Talking about important stuff, what's your take on that constant education that we should do, I think, in our open source companies to remind back to our engineering forces or marketing or whoever is involved in the project about the open source culture and in philosophy and way of working? What's your take on this one? Because I think that's one of the main things that are like somehow disregarded often, because those things do not generate revenue, right? But they do generate and create environment and like attitude towards the work. So my take is we should work constantly on this one, but that's like a cycles that do not create revenue. What's your take on this one? Again, question out of the blue.
Amanda, you want me to take it?
Yeah, why don't you start that, Kim?
Okay, so it's how do we educate between the open source versus classic or product, and I don't. So for me, you have to remember, my base is coming strictly from marketing, advocacy, and communications, and I think that if we, regardless of whether you're trying to get more users of your open source project or trying to get more buyers of your product, you can't force anybody to use an open source project. You can't force anybody to buy your product, but you can provide information that helps them make that decision for themselves. So when I think about any of the communications or any of the content that I'm going to produce, it's about educating people. Like if you're trying to do this with Kubernetes, here's an open source way, and you're going to need to use this open source project and that open source project, and it's probably going to take about this many resources, or you can spend this much money to buy the SaaS product, and it kind of all gets rolled in. I mean, I'm sure with Rancher and K3S, is K3S? Did I say it right? Okay, sorry. Oh my God, I got a brain fade all of a sudden. It's probably the same thing, right? You have the same thing. Like you can use K3S or you can buy Rancher, and using your company specifically as an example. And I don't know if you do this in your marketing. I haven't reviewed your marketing, but educating people on here. If you use K3S, this is everything you're going to have to do. You're going to have to add all these other open source projects, or you can just buy Rancher and it works out of the box. So you have to decide where you want to make your investment, right? So it comes down to, for me, it comes down to, I like to educate and help people make that decision, because I don't want to sell to them. Nobody wants to be sold to, and that's a huge tenet in open source. Like the users, they value their privacy. They don't want to be sold to. They want to learn something. And if I can keep that in mind with any of the communications and the reach outs that I do, then I have much less risk of them turning me off and never listening to anything that I have to say again.
Yeah, I totally agree. Out there right now, you just want to understand the facts so that you can make the best decision. And so just knowing the facts, I think, is a good way to go.
Good. And before we can slowly going to wrap up, for the folks who joined later, you still can ask questions if you have any. You can do that in the chat. But to wrap up, what are the main challenges in that balancing out between open source activities and corporate. Can you like bullet point them super quickly to provide a solution for each one? Can you do that on the spot? I'm pretty sure he is super experienced, both of you, so I'm pretty sure you can handle that. But
What did you like on the spot?
So what kind of challenges you have, and we kind of defined one of the questions, like how you continue to sail in this kind of muddy waters of we're right now, and stay true to the open source.
Yeah, I would. So one, yeah, put us on the spot. You know, we do this every day, and I don't know if I ever totally think about it. So I wrote a couple ideas here, and one is trying to get the team out of the silos. And Amanda talked earlier about that with her listening tour and kind of getting people out of the silos. That's one of the challenges, helping everybody understand what open source is trying to accomplish and what product is trying to accomplish. And this is how it rolls up into the overall organizational goals, so that the teams understand how their contribution is important to the company. That's one of them I can think of.
I mean, for silos, 100%. The other thing that I can think of, like just a big challenge right now, is just coming back to that, team charter and making sure that you are very clear on what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for, and having a document that's completely open that you can share widely with people, I think is a huge takeaway.
Yeah, and then building on that as well is ensuring that those lines of communication are open. And I think that kind of comes back to my first one, is on the silos, is opening up that communication and helping people understand what everybody's role is.
Yeah, totally. You have to understand what everybody's role is to make it work.
Good. So I think with that we can wrap up. I'm gonna just for the folks who are not aware of your talk, I'm gonna paste the link to the recording from last KubeCon, so
Thank
people can check your talk and provide some feedback. So with that, I think, do you want to add something else, or we can close? I know Kim, you're like super busy at the Open Source Summit right now, so they want to take too much of your time in this morning.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So many of you are balancing open source and product needs in your organizations. And when I go to events like this, I love talking with other people on how they've done that. Now, Amanda and I put together this presentation and to kind of share, this is how we do it. But when you see us, because Amanda, hopefully you'll be at KubeCon. Are you gonna be at KubeCon in Atlanta, Amanda? Orland's nodding.
I am.
See, Kim. Away.
But when you see us, I love hearing how other people solve this, because it's a dynamic that it's hard to solve, and we have, I have ideas, things I've tried and things that have failed, and so I love learning about what other people have tried, because we're all just trying to. For me, I just want the users to get their hands on the technology, give it a try, see if they like it.
Yeah, completely. I would just say it's hard. So give it a go. Please reach out if you have other ways of going about it that you've had success, or something that you've tried that has definitely not worked. I just love learning and love implementing new things. And just keeping the innovation and spirit of open source alive. So definitely completely open to continuing this conversation, and just keep learning from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So see you both at KubeCon in Atlanta, maybe. But by the way, we should. I think that's a great topic of like doing kind of workshop on place and in one of the maintainers summit, like how people balance this stuff. And because there were every eh, like a few places, for example at FOSDEM this year there was few great topics around talks around um, how to do business with open source and what are the main challenges. So people are kind of opening up a little bit, but still this is kind of taboo of in the area. People are not like easily sharing their approaches and what kind of issues and struggles they have. So I think we should talk about this more, because that, in my opinion, that also lowers the frustration of companies changing their licenses, for example, because people do not understand the action behind that, like why was that necessary, for example. So yeah, I hope we can chat in Atlanta about that.
Let's do
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, let's do it. I did say I was going to do the mic drop, and like I'm not doing these anymore. But I think it's a great idea. I think that if a workshop, it makes so much more sense. You know, standing up there talking about it, it's hard. But when somebody can say, hey, this is the problem I have. You know, great. Then let's whiteboard it out and let's come up with some ideas. You know, collective ideas in a workshop type setting. That's a good idea.
When you have like 200 people facing the same issue from different angles, I think that can be super insightful for everyone. So
if I do that, will you bring French fries for me?
All right.
He knows I love French fries. You got to bring.
I can do that. Sure.
Food.
I hope George Castro is listening, so he can do something to arrange your space for this discussion. Alrighty.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. Hope to see you, everybody in the community. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.